Welcome back to HomeSpot, everyone. So on today's episode, we are going to be making a crosscut sled. Now, I already have a crosscut sled, and I've had two in total. This will be the third one. We're going to be doing a little bit of upgrades to it. I'm pretty much going to be taking everything that I've learned in the past two cutting boards and just implementing it into this third one. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background, the first one that I made happened to be just very, very big, very large, very heavy. It was very good if you wanted to cut something pretty large, but that wasn't very often that I needed to do. So I hated using it. It was just big, bulky, it was just rough to move around. So the second one that I made was the exact opposite. I made a nice, sleek, smooth one. This one right here. So I actually really like using this one here, but it's not very good for larger stock. So the first thing we're going to do, we are going to make it a little bit bigger once again. We're going to try to eliminate the fact that it's going to be heavy. And the second major upgrade is going to be the measuring here. So right now for measuring, I'll either measure the piece of wood and just line it up with the knife blade right here, or I will take my ruler, measure it out 2 inches, 6 inches, whatever it may be. This is already at 6 inches right here. I'll take a piece of wood and a clamp and use it as a stop block and just cut my piece of wood. Now, yes, this is a very first world problem. I get it. I understand that. But I do use the Crosscut Sled enough to justify upgrading it and putting a little bit of money into it. So let me kind of give you an idea of what I'm thinking here. So first up, we have our Kreg T-track system, top track system, I should call it, and our flip stop. So this is going to be the biggest improvement. We have a couple self-adhesive tapes there for our measuring. And this is kind of what it's going to look like. This is what I'm thinking. Now, it is going to be a total of 48 inches wide. I was only thinking 36 at first, but I just cannot get myself to actually cut this piece of aluminum. It's too nice, and it's already here, and I've already paid the price for it. So we're going to use the entire 48 inches. We're going to do 16 inches to the left side of the blade, 32 to the right side of the blade, and we're probably going to make it nice and fancy just like everything else that I have as far as paint wise. You don't have to do that, of course, but again, I want it to match. I want it to look nice, and it just makes me want to use it that much more. So that's what I have for you guys. Let's start building. Okay, and just how I start every single one of my projects, before I actually get started, I like to measure out the blade, make sure it's perfectly 90 degrees. And I do this every single time that I move the blade. If I move it to a 30-degree cut and I need to move it back, it always gets measured out just to make sure it's nice and square. But first up, we start with the table saw runners. These are going to guide your fence along the table saw at the exact same angle every single time. Now you want to cut them out a little bit rough first and then just sand them down. That way they fit super smooth, super snug, no lateral movement back and forth. Okay, and once your runners are cut out, it's time to move to the actual base of the sled itself. Now I already have everything all measured out. This is 18 inches wide, and that will give us enough room for the cutoff, the other 6 inches here, to make the actual back side of the fence. Now the back fence, with the stop block that I'm using from Kreg, it does call for a 2¼ inch fence height. I went just slightly over that by about 1/16 of an inch, just because I don't want the actual stop block dragging on the fence itself. So just to give me that gap, I went 1/16 over. Okay, and I'm going to be gluing these two boards together just to make my back fence that much thicker, that much sturdier. Okay, and while the fence is drying, I'm going to also go ahead and glue up my runners to my base itself. Now what you want to do is you want to use just a little bit of glue, that way you don't have too much squeeze out and it gets stuck all over your table saw. You do want to position it using your fence, that way it's as close as 290 as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect yet, but it does have to be close. Okay, and so the next day we start by removing any squeeze out that you had overnight, which actually isn't bad, and you just grab a simple chisel and go to town on it. Again, just make it as clean as you possibly can. Same thing with the fence itself, and you want to go ahead and start sanding it. Now here's where you can really see how the top track is going to work. So I need to make a groove, or a rabbet in this case, to make it fit. Once you have the rabbet cut out, just a quick test fit just to make sure everything lines up smoothly. Okay, and now to drill out some holes in the aluminum top track, and these holes are about 5 to 6 inches apart. Once all of the holes are drilled out in the top track, I do use a self-centering drill bit to drill a pilot hole into the wood itself and just apply all of my screws onto the top track. Okay, up next, I like having a visual representation of what we're actually going to cut out in the base. So that's exactly what we're doing. We're drawing all of our lines to see where exactly we're going to be cutting. Now the radiuses can be done a few different ways. You can get a can of the radius that you want. I simply got some fishing string and just hooked it up to the pencil. Now the trick here is to use it at the very bottom or as close as you can get it to the tip, that way it doesn't wobble on you, and just simply strike your radius. Okay, now that we have everything drawn out, it's time to cut everything out, and with the help of the circular saw and the jigsaw to cut out the radiuses here, or the radii if you want to call it. Now one thing that I do want to point out, and just kind of like you're seeing here, please use, if you're cutting against the grain, use a piece of tape to eliminate as much of the unnecessary tear out as possible. If you're cutting with the grain, you don't necessarily need it, but against it, yes, it's a good idea. Okay, once done with that, you can still see that I had some tear out. So just grab some sandpaper and knock it down. Okay, now with the off cut that I just cut off the base, we're going to be making the front fence itself. Now this one's going to be a little bit bigger just because I want a little bit sturdier. I did measure it out to about 3.5 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and take both pieces and simply glue it up once again. Okay, and I let the glue cure overnight, and the first thing I want to do is just get everything back to square. So cut off both sides, and same thing with the top and bottom. Okay, and just to make it a little less blocky, I do cut out a 45-degree cut on both sides, about 1.5 inches from each end. And now it's time to install the actual front fence onto the sled itself. Now this one does not need to be perfectly square. You're never going to reference anything off of this, but you know, just make it as nice as you can. Now before I attach the rear fence, I do like to cut out a little groove, that way dust and stuff can slide under and it doesn't affect any of your squareness. Now this is probably going to be the most important part, or the most important process here, and it's getting the rear fence as square as you possibly can. Now it doesn't necessarily have to be super perfect right now. We'll get to that here in a second as far as adjusting it, but you do want to get it to as close as you possibly can. And you want to drill out only 2 screws right now, or 2 pivot points. One on the very left, one on the very right. Next you move on over to actually seeing how square it is, and I am using the 5-cup method. I will link some resources as to how you can do it, but this is how you find out how true or how 90 degrees you are. Whatever measurements you come up with, you can definitely adjust. Okay, my math came out that I was 0.0175 off. And so now I need to figure out how to move my fence 0.0175. It just happens to be that 4 pieces of paper came out to 0.018, which is perfectly fine with me. I'm not worried about 0.005 of an inch. And now you do have to drill out a new screw. You do not want to use the exact same one, or else the fence will go back to exact same alignment. Once you have everything aligned, now time to go to town and put a few screws, that way it never moves on you. Now at this point, you could literally just throw on your stop block and your measuring tape on top and call it a day. You are literally completely done. It's a fully functioning sled, but I'm gonna go ahead and paint mine. Now, first up, we need to paint the aluminum. Now, aluminum can be a little bit tricky to do it correctly. What you wanna do is you wanna take some self-etching primer first and do about 2 to 3 coats of this. And in this case, you do have to rotate the aluminum extrusion. So wait for it to dry, turn it around. It did take me upwards of about 3 hours to do, but nonetheless, always do aluminum with self-etching primer and then move on to your actual base coat, which in this case is black. Same thing with the black, 2 to 3 coats all the way around. Now, while the paint is drying, I'm gonna go ahead and start sanding down my entire sled. Sanding it down and just taking it apart in general. I'm not gonna paint it while it's all together, so I do take it completely apart. Okay, as far as the paint, we're going with the theme that I already have going, red and black. The base is going to be red. Both fences, the back and forward face, I'm sorry, not face, but fence, are going to be black itself. Now, every panel gets 2 coats of red or black, and honestly about 5 coats of the clear coat. I know this is going to take a lot of damage and a lot of abuse, so I want it to be as sturdy as possible. For the clear coat, I am using a polyacrylic. This is a lot thinner than a polyurethane, so the more coats the better. I did end up doing about 5 to 6 coats. Okay, and one thing that I should have mentioned earlier about the prep before you start painting, you want to put tape over the runners just because you don't want the runners getting any thicker. You already have them dialed down, so don't make any more work for yourself, just tape them out. Okay, and at this point you're now just reassembling your sled once again, both fences back on. It should reline back up exactly where you left it. Again, you do want to test it out a little bit later once again, just to check for square. Now, even though I taped my runners, somehow some paint got in there. So pretty simply just, take a piece of sandpaper. I have a sanding sponge and just hit a little bit on the runners itself. Again, you don't want to take too much off. Once that's done, I do use some paste wax. That way the fence slides nice and easily on the table saw itself. Okay, now to install the top track on the fence itself once again. Okay, and here's where I messed up. I was thinking that the 0 degree measurement should be right exactly where the table saw blade kerf is. I was incorrect on that. I didn't account for that the marker on the block itself was offset by about 3/4 of an inch to the left, so I placed it on there. I had to redo it, and that came out perfectly fine. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect here. You still have some micro adjustments available to you, but just get it as close as possible. And here you can see me now micro adjusting it. I was off about a 1/16 of an inch off, so micro adjust it and redo it, make sure everything is perfectly fine, which it was. Now in my case, I'm actually going to be hanging up my table saw sled on my wall, so I'm going to be drilling 2 holes. That way I can use a couple screws just to hold it up. And just like that, everyone, we are done with our Crosscut sled. So overall, I really like it. I'm really enjoying the capacity that I have to the right, all the way up to 34.5 inch capacity. That's a lot more than what I'm used to. The stop block, so far overall, I really like it. Pretty much you set it, and it's very accurate for any repeatable cuts. And if you don't need it, just simply swing it out of the way or move it out of the way, completely up to you. Even after the paint itself, it still glides very smoothly, so good there. I was having some doubts about that. Again, you don't have to necessarily paint it these colors, or you don't have to paint it for that matter. You can just leave it straight plywood and wood itself. This is a shop project. Not much people are gonna see it in their home, but again, I personally like having nice things. I know it's gonna get a lot of use and a lot of wear and tear up on the top, so I did put quite a few coats of polyacrylic. I believe I put a total of 6 coats, both top and bottom. But overall, again, I like it. We'll see how it holds up over time. I'll keep you updated on that. You will be seeing this Crosscut Sled plenty of times. I use the Crosscut Sled pretty much on every single episode. If not, I would say about 90% of the episodes you'll see it. So you'll see this plenty times to come. That's all that I really have for you guys today. Please browse the channel, like, subscribe, and we'll see you all next time.